Hey everyone, it's the Nitty Professor. Trying times are often times when people think turning to addiction is called for. That's something I experienced in my own family, and I thought I would look today at the topic of knitting as a healthy addiction, because I think a lot of us feel the pressure of stuff. Not going to go into a lot of detail because it's depressing. I will say this much. My son is very worried about his future right now because things aren't going too great. In any case, added to that is the fact that in the latest AARP magazine, which arrived in my mailbox, there was a whole spread about gambling. And I was like, okay, that's, it's interesting. So went into the addictive qualities of gambling, and then it went into how gambling among people my age, and probably among people all ages, increased due to two factors. One was the pandemic, especially online gambling. And of course, the pandemic is kind of stressful. Like, these times are kind of stressful. And the other factor was law that made the spread of online gambling sort of inevitable. So you guys already know that. Addiction is, tempting, and during periods of what we might call anomie, that's Emil Durkheim's word, when things just aren't going great, right? Society is just struggling. I think rates of addiction and other things like suicide, etc., probably crime, tend to rise. So I feel fortunate, and I'm sure a lot of you guys do too, that you have your fiber crafting to turn to, because it can be addictive, but in a way that is a lot more salutary, to use a big word, than what my brother used to do, which basically was just drag home boxes of wine. That didn't go too well for him. That's why I'm still here, and even though he was older than me, he is not. So, in fact, sometimes my sister and I will talk about periods like what's going on now. Different things have happened over the past decade since he passed away in 2017. And like, gosh, if our brother was here, he wouldn't be able to handle it. And he probably wouldn't. I mean, if he was here now, with all the stuff that's going down, with all the corruption, the gross corruption, he would probably be drinking, if he hadn't already drunk himself to death. So, political instability, economic hardship, chronic uncertainty, there's so much uncertainty. Terrible uncertainty now. There's a loss of control that people feel. I know my son really feels that. He's uses the gig apps. In fact, he's out at a DoorDash right now. And he's like, how can I make money with the price of gas? Loss of control. There's a lot of social fragmentation. I think people are scratching their heads, and they probably have less idea than they even had a year or two ago what camp they should fall into in order to feel like they're in with the right people who can create positive change. So we're more fragmented. We're obviously emotionally exhausted. There's just a lot of that going on. And it makes addictive behaviors come into play as attempts to regulate fear, for example, to numb your anxiety. That's a big draw. And also, curiously, and I can relate to this as someone who has a history of anorexia, to regulate predictability, to just control those routines, to have a feeling like what's going to happen when, because of, that cigarette that you drag on, or that vape, or that, whatever it is that you're addicted to. That a lot of addictions are harmful. Certainly my addiction to not eating was very harmful. Thus, the fact that at age 49, I had to have both my hips replaced. It's also a way to escape relentless stress. Chemical addiction, gambling addiction, any of those. They, in the moment, they're like, and then, of course, at that moment, it's over kind of fast. Even shopping addiction. There's so many things. I watch a lot of hoarders, and a lot of those people have shopping addiction. It's crazy. The little dopamine. That's kind of what you're after, rapid dopamine rewards, which is temporary, but it does create a temporary sense of relief, and that's what brings you back. I need that relief again, so let's just, make another trip to Kohl's, or let's, make another trip to whoever is selling me whatever, Adderall, whatever drug it is that I feel like I need right now in order to survive the next 10 minutes. I'm working on book 9 of my novel, and I'm trying to learn more about addictive behaviors because of a character that I have who is exhibiting that and causing havoc, which of course makes the fiction dramatic and, suspenseful. The brain, it's our friend, but it can also be our problem when it gravitates towards anything that offers immediate comfort or maybe distraction, stimulation, and a false sense of agency. I say false because I think addiction ultimately it destroys your agency, because it sort of centers it in something over which ultimately you only think you have control, but you really don't. And therefore the long-term consequences are harmful, but we don't always remember that in the moment. So how is this an answer to that? By the way, I can't finish the scarf until after Pride, because I'll probably be wanting to knit on it at the Pride Festival here in town. So I'm going to probably only knit on it right now and then wait and bring it to Pride. So there are healthy habits, structured hobbies that can satisfy a lot of these needs without that destructive fallout. Knitting is just one example. Now you can posit whatever healthy habit that you can imagine. In fact, it'd be interesting to see in the comments what other ones that you would suggest besides fiber crafting. I can think of one of my other habits. I don't really have the opportunity right now because I have lack of space, but doing puzzles. For a while when my eldest was not trying to manage the current economy, he was out and about, and I used his room as my puzzle making room, and it was a lot of fun. So hopefully that day will return. We just don't know when. But in any case, knitting is a great example of a structured hobby that can meet a lot of these similar needs. It offers rhythm, which is nice, and it's like a lullaby type of effect. I'm thinking my dog, Ari, right now is chewing on a Brazilian chew. Hopefully the Brazilians have made a really nice chew for him. He seems to be enjoying it, and even the rhythm of his chewing is sort of relaxing to hear that. The repetition can offer a sense of comfort, routine, just like we were saying before, predictability. You make so many stitches and you have a row, you make so many rows and then you have a section, or color work patterns. Things unfold and things manifest and things are realized, and you have a sense of accomplishment. And there's also this nice tactile sense, this sense of tactile grounding and this lovely wool, the regularity of the texture. I think a lot about how knitting feels now since I'm writing about a blind knitter. And it's so true, there's something about this, especially this kind of stockinette fabric. It feels wonderful with this beautiful wool and going through my hands and exercising my hands, that whole tactile experience, the sense of measurable progress. It's reassuring. It's also reassuring from the sense that you're taking something that's arguably a little chaotic, if you start from wool proper, particularly, the disorganized fibers that have been carded, combed, spun, and now knit into a textile, you're creating order out of chaos, and it's so comforting. It's like, whoa, that now I can breathe again, I can live again, I can relax again, I can get through my day because I have this sort of tactile reassurance that order is accessible, therefore things will be okay. Knitting is great. Crochet, felting, spinning, because it engages both the mind and the body. I like combining those actually. It engages the mind and the body in a calming process. Even the thought processes of, just focusing on this small, very near experience of, okay, what comes next? Maybe it's a color work design, or the next. Sometimes it's fun in this to think about the pooling. What color is going to come next? Well, now I'm on orange. It's moving into yellow. It's moving into blue. It's moving into green, and it's like a calming effect of, sort of shrinking your world to a location that's manageable, to a stage, an arena that I can deal with because it's, it's of a scale that is manageable. There's also the steadiness, a sense of stability, the steady motion of stitches. It can reduce your stress response. It can reduce racing thoughts. It can create a kind of a meditative state. And it makes you feel less helpless, makes you feel just a little bit more in control. And it can also form a kind of antidote to doom scrolling fatigue, which I can't imagine now spending a lot of time on some of the social media, especially depending on your algorithm, if all you see is, terrible things, because there are a lot of terrible things to see going on right now. And they're frightening, they're like, people's future is sort of, we don't know what's going to happen. Are we going to make it? Because if you need that social safety net, is it even going to be there? I feel like a lot more people are going to need that social safety net now than was the case a year ago. But this is helpful. And unlike a lot of compulsive behaviors, like compulsive shopping or compulsive gambling or stuff like that, fiber arts actually foster community. One of the things I was reading about in that AARP article is how people hide their gambling addiction. It's so destructive. I was reading about people who were losing $20,000, $50,000, $100,000, and then trying to hide it from their spouse, to hide it from their children. Oh my God. Just the opposite is going on with fiber. We can actually engage in community. There's nothing to hide. We're doing something creative. We're doing something that is constructive, something that is calming, that builds even friendships, and allows people to share patterns. We can share techniques. We can even share narratives. I love talking about my writing and how I incorporate these things in there, and then people read it, and then we get into some little conversations and stuff. You can share humor, mutual aid. I love learning about how people are using their crafting to help others. It's just, it's crazy wonderful. You can even foster intergenerational knowledge, that connection to the past, that connection, the identity connection that makes you feel like I deserve to be here because of the ancestors that came before me, and that helped me establish my identity, and I can arouse and reawaken that identity through the action of my hands, mimicking the action of their hands decades ago. It adds meaning, it adds meaning in a way that other addictions like certainly not eating, that didn't add any meaning to my life. It was just sheer control. That's all it was. It went on for 7 years, people. If you ever want me to do a podcast on anorexia, hit me up. I would have a lot to say, but this is way better. This is way better. And I'm also not hurting my body, I have to be careful how much I knit and when, as far as joints and that kind of thing, but that's pretty manageable again. We also can think of knitting and fiber crafting in terms of its utility. So puzzles, I have to kind of take it down, but if I make something that I can wear it down the road, I could give it away, I could, you can sell it, can knit something that's tangible, socks, hats, scarves, even blankets, you can even use your knitting to repair things. I actually repaired a sock that I had the other day, and I felt good because it, wasn't wearable before and it was after, and it just, it's that's a tangible sense of progress where I actually did something concretely useful and good. And that it has a kind of a stabilizing effect, especially when stuff around you, public discourse, public, actions, negotiations, all that stuff is very unstable, unpredictable, and arguably not, furthering of thriving and flourishing. I think we can argue that fiber crafting does foster flourishing in many ways. It's a healthy addiction. It differs greatly from destructive ones. It expands life instead of narrowing life. It allows us to open up our creative opportunities and impulses, and it also encourages, very healthy kinds of of qualities like patience. It takes a long time to make a sweater. I've been working on this scarf for over a year. And I'm fine with it. When it's done, it's going to be done. It's going to be incredible. In the process, it's really fun to work on. Also fosters your emotional regulation and helps you build a skill. You can also teach others that skill. It can also foster generosity, creativity, obviously, and sustainable routines. And instead of, like secrecy and compulsion or even self-destruction, something like fiber crafting, or in my sister's case, she likes to work on art projects. It's just the opposite. It's actually building who you are, building your identity, building your skills, building your reach and your contribution to making the world just a little bit better place. Fiber crafting is also a useful way to resist. I think things like gambling, drug addiction, all those kinds of things, it really isn't a useful form of resistance. It's more a form of retreat and escapism. But this addiction is one that can actually create a hedge or even a positive force against despair and against disposability. The feeling that you don't count, or the earth doesn't count, or, people don't count. They do. And when you create things with your own hands, you're just really confirming or affirming human value, human worthiness, which is, just the opposite of, in my case, anorexia. Also helps you to slow down, which can be very useful to the extent that we're being run ragged by a society that tells us to work. Well, we're getting less and less and less. We can slow down, take a breath, and foster things like repairing rather than discarding, and slow fashion, which I think is also a useful thing to keep in mind. Investing care into the objects around us and care into the objects that others may receive from us in spite of the turbulence that is surrounding us. So it's a really useful, it's a great habit. It's a great way to rebel against all of that. It can also provide something that is valuable from the standpoint of a reminder that even small actions, but consistent actions, can still produce something that is worthy, something warm, something beautiful, something that gets rid of the chaos by adding structure, regularity, pattern, and beauty, one stitch at a time. So, if you find yourself being drawn by some kind of addictive activity, or intensifying, some addiction you already have going, I think remind yourselves that knitting, fiber crafting, crocheting, could be cross stitch, could be needlepoint, could be sewing, quilting. All of those things are just really wonderful addictions that can help us through trying times, give us a sense of agency, a sense of stability, a sense of purpose, in a way that some of the other addictions, which might be more powerful but are also more destructive, obviously can't. So with that in mind, I wish all you guys a really good week. I hope you find time to do some crafting every day, and would love to know your experiences with knitting as an addiction and how it helps you to get through these really, really challenging and frankly scary times. So you guys take care. We'll talk soon. Ciao.